Audience, welcome to Viewpoint from Overseas. This is August 9th, 2019. And first of all, Ph.D. Eid Mubarak. I always make the clarification.
Eid Mubarak to Dr. Saab also.
This is not about so much celebration, especially at a time like this. It is asking for blessings and barakat, as we say. So today, again, we are fortunate to have with us Dr. Adil Najam, who's currently based in Boston. And as you will see in the video, a nice personal library of his, which I keep wanting to read. But also, of course, with me is Dr. Misbah Azam Saab. And let's jump right into it, Dr. Saab. That old curse about living in interesting times is coming back to haunt us and is cyclic. This week saw major developments in Kashmir. At one level, in fact, let me hold back and let you summarize what happened, Dr. Saab. This is because it's a very interesting thing to see Pakistanis suddenly start mouthing platitudes about Article 370, and on the other side see Indians, a lot of Indians actually, now talk about democracy. And interestingly, the best comment on the constitutional issues I've seen is from a Pakistani lawyer. But why don't you take it away from there and let's get beyond the usual platitudes going about on the media. Let's hear your summary of what exactly has happened.
So I think a lot of things have happened. One of the things that's happened is that I think officially we can now say that there has been a status change in the status of the world. It is no longer interesting times that we live in. It is now dangerous times that we live in. And dangerous times certainly in South Asia because of the Kashmir situation, but I would say dangerous times for the world. You can look at a world map and just try to think all of the places that are entering that, whether it's Hong Kong, whether it's right here in the US, whether it is in Africa, whether it is in Europe. So these are dangerous times, but that's a larger point. The immediate point in Kashmir, I think, and I'm grateful for your question because the questions usually have been so much in the immediate that we forget the bigger picture of what has happened. What has happened is a number of things. What has happened, first of all, is that India has now officially and dramatically changed its stance on Kashmir. And what they have said is that this is no longer an issue that we are going to resolve either bilaterally or multilaterally. Right? So in 1947, India had gone to the United Nations and said, here is an issue, and we want to solve it, and we want the multilateral system to help us solve it. In Shimla, they changed their stance and said, no, we will solve it, but we will solve it bilaterally. And now what Mr. Modi has done is he said, I have solved it unilaterally. Therefore, this is no longer the line of control, this is the border. We will now use our means, and that is now that may be a statement that will again come into contention, but that is the dramatic thing. It is not as if before this move Kashmir was some haven of great peace. It is not as if Pakistan and India were sort of these great friends who lived happily ever after. So in that sense, it's not as if suddenly things have gone bad. Things were bad to begin with, but the nature of what a potential future could be is being changed by Mr. Modi, and that is one of the big things. The silence of the international community, or the relative silence of the international community, kind of suggests that the international community, United Nations, the US, the UK, others are either distracted enough or not interested enough, or thinking that the power balance in South Asia between India and Pakistan has changed enough that they have not jumped in and tried to restrain, in this case India, as one might have expected in another time. Now that all of this is so what has changed there is the nature of the conflict in Kashmir. The second thing that's changed is the nature of the life and the dangers that the Kashmiri people are living in. So what has been taken away from Kashmiris in Kashmir, in Srinagar, in the valley, is the illusion of the idea that they had relative independence. And what Mr. Modi is promising them, I'm trying to be as fair as possible, is come and I will make you fully integrated into India. And in lieu of that, we will provide development and other goodies and higher land prices and so on and so forth. But what they have been forced to give up is that notion of having a flag of their own, having a parliament of their own, having that special status. And finally, I think what has changed and what the very vibrant debate in India is saying is that this is not just about Kashmir as far as India is concerned. This is about Mr. Modi's larger agenda of the Hinduization of India, of a certain vision of India which is not Mr. Nehru's vision. And this is the boldest move of the new majoritarianism in India that he has made. Now remember, this article that we are talking about was not unique to Kashmir. The clauses that are being were at least, I think, in about six other territories.
371.
Yes.
In Nagaland,
Manipur.
in parts of Assam. So this has so the noise you hear from India is not just about what's happening in Kashmir. It is about what's happened to the Indian constitution. Now, where in all of this is Pakistan? Unfortunately, Pakistan has been left in a situation where it has very little options. It's not that it's not tried them, but because this has been a constitutional move, because there has been that international silence, because Pakistan has remained diplomatically isolated, it finds its hands tied up without too many options and mostly tied up by ourselves.
So that, I don't know where to start. There's a couple of things I want to tease out later, but Misbah Sahib, you...
Yeah, actually, Dr. You say very rightly that Mr. Modi has suddenly came up and then he came up with this quote-unquote revolutionary idea to resolve it, quote-unquote, unilaterally. Now, there is something which is the practicality on the ground, and something is the philosophical thing. Philosophical thing that all of us have to be worried about the Kashmiri people, and so does Indian should do that. However, the world doesn't work like that. The people are less important than the land as far as the strategy is concerned, as far as militaries are concerned and all that. Now what India did, it's a clear picture of that instead of stopping the atrocities, instead of listening them, they just went there and took over the land. Why not Pakistan can counter it by changing Pakistan constitution and declaring it the province, the Kashmir as their province. I mean, and this is the thing I was reading I was hearing by some, maybe you know him, he's a very famous journalist in Pakistan, Mr. Ziauddin Saab. He was suggesting, and I started looking into that. So I just thought that I should raise it to you and ask you how you see it, because this is the way world works, that it's a land which is, and like we never talk about Kashmir, as you even mentioned in our Urdu show, that we never care about Kashmiri people. We use Kashmiri people because we are interested in Kashmir, not in the people, So kindly guide us, on this issue and Mr. Ziauddin's point of view on that.
So those are very, very serious and interesting points. Let me tease out a few. The first thing, if you allow me to just slightly disagree, I don't think the Kashmiri people is the philosophical issue. I think constitutions are a philosophical issue. People are real. When they bleed, real blood flows. When they cry, you can hear them. So I do think that it is not as you are correct that you do not see the international community crying for the Kashmiri people, but that doesn't mean that they are irrelevant. So if you think about players and moves, Mr. Modi and his government made their moves. So if you think of it as a chess game, and it's not, but if you think of moves, Mr. Modi made his move, and it was a move that he had been saying he would make, and it was a stunning move that many people thought he wouldn't, but he dared and he did it. Pakistan finds itself without too many moves that it can make. Right? So the Pakistan reaction is, so what is our next move? However, and that we can talk about, there are some, but Pakistan doesn't have too many. The important point is, which is the main player who hasn't made their move yet? And that is the Kashmiri people themselves. And partly because Kashmir is the world's largest prison right now, and we don't know what is happening there. It is the most militarized place on earth. One soldier for about every 8 or every 6 Kashmiris. Now, what could those moves be? If in fact, at some point this curfew will have to be lifted. Now, either at that point, the Kashmiri people say, okay, since you changed the constitution, we will now go back to normal and live happily ever after. If that happens, that's fine. But if we see a lot of bloodshed, if we see a lot of violence, if we see that violence spilling into other parts of India, if we see that violence spilling into other parts of Pakistan, if we see refugees movements, then that move and whatever those moves are, because the Kashmiri people are cornered, doesn't mean that they don't have means. The Kashmir issue has remained alive for 70 years, Mr. Ashraf, if I might be allowed to say that, not because Pakistan kept it alive. Certainly not because India kept it alive. It has been kept alive because the Kashmiri people refused to let it die. Otherwise, it would have died very long ago. Now that might still happen. So that's the thing on that. Now on the argument which I hadn't seen before, on Ziauddin, I thought I would need to think more. My first reaction, however, is that the move that works for India doesn't really work for Pakistan. And so yes, Pakistan could declare it, but I'm thinking, so what will Pakistan gain from it? The reason this move works for India is that in India's case, Delhi was not able to control Srinagar. Throughout those 70 years, despite their might, Srinagar was trying, the centrifugal force was constantly for 70 years rebelling against Delhi. Now that is not the case in Muzaffarabad. Nothing, you can declare it a province, but it's not as if Muzaffarabad is saying we don't want to be part of Pakistan. So I do not see what strategic benefit Pakistan gets from it. I think from a Pakistani perspective, the focus should remain on Kashmir. I just don't see any benefit to that. In some ways, doing that would accept Kashmir's, Mr. Modi's move. But that is my first reaction. I do need to think about it more.
Dr. The way I understand Ziauddin Saab's point is that although it is just on the Twitter, I'm sorry to say I'm quoting you Twitter, but Ziauddin Saab is an authentic person, so that's why I'm doing it. Ziauddin Saab's point, what I understand, I could be wrong about it, you can see more than I can see, that what he's trying to say that once you make it in the constitution, then Pakistan, I mean, he's talking about a very long-term diplomacy. He's not talking about what will happen next in 5 years or 6. Suppose you do that. Then what happens, his point is that the president of Kashmir, Prime Minister of Kashmir will be the chief minister of the all Jammu and Kashmir province. Over the years, this thing, we can do the diplomacy on that our constitution say that this territory is disputed. And then we can move ahead, because see, in one sense, he say very clearly in his note that since no option for war, number 2, diplomacy, as you said also very rightly so, that right now you can hardly do anything because the things which has to be done was before. So he's kind of giving another maybe 15 years from now, 20 years from now, create this issue so that this will be alive there always, so that India would be under pressure.
So it could be, but let me add one point, because I think it's important that you raise, and then I'll come to your main point. The first point is this: it is not as if Pakistan can't do anything at all. I think Pakistan still has to have the diplomatic high, and the real test of it, which should have come immediately, unfortunately we are too isolated. The next step and the next test of it will come in the next 3-4 weeks. In the United Nations, there are a number of important votes. In September, there is the global meeting where all the leaders come. And that is the time for diplomacy, not only for what Mr. Imran Khan goes and says there, but whether Pakistan can get other countries to keep raising this issue. If we hear total silence or near silence there, then that would be much more worrisome. But coming to the major point that you're saying about this, it could. But my worry is the following: if in fact what Mr. Modi has done is to turn the line of control into a border, then Pakistan saying this will be seen not only by Mr. Modi but by many other countries as also accepting the former line of control or the current line of control as the border. And in some ways, for those who just want to get Kashmir out of their hair, they'll say, okay, yeah, that they keep theirs, you keep yours, live happily ever after, issue solved. And that still keeps families divided, that still keeps Kashmiris divided, that still keeps the tension going, that still keeps a lot of issues. Now, what I thought of very interestingly from what you described just now, I think there is an important point there. And that is that Pakistan keeps saying, or Pakistanis keep thinking, that what has happened is that the line of control has turned into the border. So India is saying, we'll keep our Kashmir and we'll totally integrate it. And the unstated subtext is as if they are saying we are no longer interested in the Pakistan side of Kashmir. In the last 2 or 3 days, the Indian leaders have come out, and especially the more aggressive ones, and said, no. We think the border is the Kashmir border, including this part that is with Pakistan. Yes. And that is where I think Ziauddin Sahib was he's my teacher. I very, very, very long ago worked with him as a Muslim and learned a lot from him. I think where he may be alluding is that there is that danger that we should keep in mind that now with India sort of more aggressive and feeling triumph, what is the next step? The next step is then to say, okay, we have now integrated the part of Kashmir that is with us, and now our next step is to take back militarily. Because we, just as you said, consider that to be the border of this state. And those are the type of reasons for which international diplomacy is needed. As I said, I'm still not convinced that as an immediate answer, doing simply a tit for tat would do the job. But I see more clouds in the future, just like Ziauddin Sahib sees.
Yeah, I tried to contact Ziauddin Sahib this morning. I couldn't get hold on him.
So you brought up the matter of the happily ever after, Adil Sahib. Is it really possible? I mean, if Kashmir, for example, everyone tomorrow agrees that Kashmir is, off the table, everyone's, if not happy, acquiescent to what situation ends up in Kashmir. Do you think an India-Pakistan peace would happen? I just want to follow that logic of let's get Kashmir out of our hair and everything will be happily ever after. I know I'm asking for a very pure theoretical, but is that really an option?
I think it is. At some point, in some way, yes. Not only is it an option, I think it is a surprise that it hasn't happened.
No, but my question...
I'm not being philosophical here. So I think, to me, the biggest villain in all of this has always been this one guy who through his incompetence and through his hubris, created the mess, and that is Mount Baker. But that's a historical thing. So, but on an honest level, I think anyone in the world, just looking at this as a conceptual issue, should be able to see that not only is peace between India and Pakistan possible, it is in fact, not only is it desirable, it should be the de facto mode. There is so much that they can jointly celebrate.
No, but see, all of that theory...
So it's not as if there is something wrong in our genetics that we will always fight.
No, but I could go into that and say the worst fights within families or nations are always between people who are closest. I mean, it takes us siblings to really fight. My question really is, and I'm going to make one more effort to put it there, is Kashmir the only issue? Take Kashmir off the table. Can India and Pakistan get along if Kashmir is not the problem?
No, on that you're right. Kashmir is not the only issue. It's not as if Kashmir, if it had been sorted out properly in 47, we would have other things to fight about. We are quite self-sufficient in things to argue about, always. However, I do think Kashmir is a core issue in the following way. I do not think there is normalization without a real resolution to Kashmir.
Yeah, so sufficient but necessary but not sufficient.
Necessary but not sufficient.
Right.
Therefore, if you sorted the necessary out, then the likelihood of sorting out some of the other things, whether it is water, whether it is trade, whether it is other things, will be this they don't get sorted out. Now, again, I will go back to what is my standard line, which is that again there are not just two, there are three parties to this situation.
Yes.
And a solution is not just one that is acceptable to Pakistan and India. The solution, first of all, has to be acceptable to Kashmiris. And this is not again a philosophical issue. It's very simply because the Kashmiris in 70 years have demonstrated that if you find a solution that they are not happy with, they will find a way to let you know.
Right. Misbah Sahib, you had a point.
Sir, going back to this point that you just made regarding the three parties. Yes, there should be three parties, but there is one more time in the history when General Musharraf and Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, actually, they claimed they had a solution there. Okay, what was that solution? What the rumors came out, the solution seemed to me, actually, from my point of view, a very similar thing that make the line of control the border. It means Pakistan establishment is agreed on this type of arrangement. What do you say, sir?
There have been multiple times when supposedly we've been near a solution. Dr. Mohammed Ziauddin and I wrote a paper some years ago called Kashmir Ripe for Resolution with a question mark, in which we looked at every solution that had ever been proposed. There were 60-some. Every solution that had ever been proposed for Kashmir. And you are in some ways right that most of them have some sort of a mechanism where Ladakh becomes part of India, Baltistan Gilgit becomes part of Pakistan, and the remaining Kashmir, the valley, Jammu and Kashmir, both sides, get some sort of a quasi-independent status of some sort. Sometimes it's called the Andorra solution and so on and so forth. And there have also been some times when the line of control becomes some sort of a thing. But Dr. here is the important thing. A solution that two parties come to out of mutual agreement is very different from one that is forced by one of the parties, even if it is the same solution. Right? So let's go back to Mr. Trump's sort of supposed offer to mediate. If this exact same thing had come out of that mediation, that would have been more likely to lead to a peaceful future than with one party unilaterally and by force imposing it. Right? And again, the real move that hasn't yet been made, and which I think is keeping everyone on their edge, is what happens in Srinagar. It's not what happens in Delhi. Delhi has done what it had to do. It's not what happens in Islamabad, because Islamabad has limited options. The question is Srinagar. And therefore, even if that were part of it, if it had come through negotiations, now in a different world, and this could happen because sometimes negotiation is a tough game. If now, after dust settles and everything, Mr. Trump comes back and says, I think this is bad, but I really do need to get you to Modi and Imran come over to Camp David. Because we do need some sort of stability in South Asia. And out of that, something comes, that's a different story. But at this point, the unilateralness of the move and the aggressiveness of the move is what's trouble.
Okay, so Adil sir, before we wind up, because this has been a relatively long show, I do want to, especially since we're talking in English and we hopefully have a larger audience, I wanted to bring up in this whole discussion, you've been laying out how India has done something, Pakistan has very limited options. One word that has been very missing in this whole discussion, especially if you look at it from an outsider's point of view, is the word nuclear. These are both nuclear-armed states. Are you telling me, as Dr. Mohammed Yusuf, I think, posits, that making both states nuclear actually does not make a nuclear war more likely, but in fact it takes it off the table? Now, we have this whole discussion. No one has mentioned the fact that this could lead to a nuclear standoff and anything of that sort. Could you throw some light on that? Where are we on that?
I think that's a brilliant point that you're raising, and I think people haven't noted it as much as they should have, and I think you're right. This is a surprise. I have sometimes used it in tweets and mentions, but very hesitantly, in dardar. because it's not even as a word. It shouldn't be used in lightly. I think Imran Khan in his speech in Parliament came very near to using the word without using the word.
Okay.
Right? So when he talked about the unimaginable, that is what he meant. In some ways, and for whatever reasons, and I hope the international community notes this, and I hope the international community gives Pakistan due credit for it. Right? In this situation, you wouldn't expect India to raise this nuclear issue,
right?
Because they want to say everything is all okay. So where it would have come from is Pakistan in some ways, and not in some ways, in all ways, and as I said, I hope the international community notes this. Pakistan has been very, very careful, very, very responsible about not being seen to throw the nuclear word as a threat, to not be seen as even throwing the Afghanistan question as a threat. Now, again, one can go into the politics of that and say, well, maybe the great powers and the US in this case had already told Pakistan, don't go there, and somehow Pakistan responded to that. That may be so, but even if it is so, I think it demonstrates relatively reasonable behavior by Pakistan of not trying to strong arm through these very, very terrible options, one of them being nuclear, but also the option of Afghanistan continuing in the quagmire that is in is also not good. So that is why. And again, I think one of the, in some ways, the brilliance of the move, not the act, but the way Mr. Modi did it, was that it's not easy for Pakistan to raise that issue either. Right? Pakistan can't just unilaterally go and say we start a war and the war could go nuclear. It could happen if there is a spillover of military action from the Indian side, but Pakistan has had a long history of not wanting, or at least saying it doesn't want military options. And even if that were taken, who would you bomb? You would end up bombing Kashmiris.
Right. So anyway,
Pakistan's appetite for hurting Kashmiris is very different and not the same as Indians.
Right. So, in conclusion, leave us with some thoughts on where you see what is the hope of this and what is going on. And one other thing, if you can please work that in, what does this entail, or what impact does this have on Pakistan's internal politics? I mean, we haven't quite talked about that. And then, leave us with some thoughts, if not hope, about.
So, on your last point, I don't know what this has. It's not only how this issue impacts Pakistan's domestic politics, it's more how Pakistan's domestic politics has impacted this issue. I think the fact that our domestic politics is in total disarray, that neither the role of the institutions nor of the pettiness of the political parties allows the country to take a united stand, even on an issue as central as Kashmir, has hurt Pakistan's abilities. So when I was saying Pakistan doesn't have too many moves, those moves became even more worse. That option set became even worse because our domestic politics is in the shabby state that it is. That's thing one. On the long term, I think one of the conclusions I would take is that this is not just a Pakistan issue, this is or India issue, this is a Kashmir issue, and there is one most important, most affected party whose moves we do not know yet. And that worries me. That worries me greatly because they are so cornered, those moves cannot be good for anyone, including the Kashmiris themselves. And finally, diplomacy is, if you think about these as a game, even if this move has been a better one for India, that doesn't mean the game has ended. Pakistan has to continue raising the issue, not as what it means for Pakistan, certainly not in terms of just nuclear or Kashmir, but in highlighting the plight of the Kashmiris themselves. And the next important test of that, I think, will come in New York in September, when the world leaders will be at the GA. And I think that will give you a real temperature of just the level of disdain from the international community or not.
Okay, well, audience, you heard this rather long and robust discussion. Please, if you do speak Urdu Hindi, check out our Urdu show as well. That covered a lot of very interesting ground. Until next week, from all of us here in the studio and from Dr. Adil Najam, thank you, sir, for being with us again. Until next time, Allah Nigaban.